Well, what started out to be 3 inches of snow is now an ice storm. But boy, that coffee tastes good on a day like today. What a mess. I just can't convince these birds that when it's cold and icy like this, the coffee tastes great. They still prefer seeds. Say, what coffee? We don't drink coffee. Forget it. Fill up the feeder. Stop being a baby. Get that feeder filled. They're all waiting their turn. Oh, I love these little guys. Anyway, we're in the middle of what started out to be a snowstorm, then turned to an ice storm. Supposed to get slushy and mushy tonight and then freeze up, so I don't know. Well, it's good that we're not a bird anyway. I guess it's easier for us. Pay the heating bill, turn the heat up, make a big pot of that Javalia coffee, and you know what? Snow is coming down. It's turning to ice. Oh God, a mess. Now, while the snow and ice are falling out there, one of the things I wanted to go over here, I wanted to, I wanted to start the rudder within this session, but I need to have a little, well, I don't know what you would really call it, a little plan of action before this, because working with Joe, I'm trying to keep it so that I can always feed Joe the next parts from the molds and the shapes and the patterns and everything, so of course we're working on this together. Now, I've worked with Joe on so many projects and so many things where we've shared the workload, and he's really a joy to work with. But in this particular case, I have to take the lead role here because a lot of this stuff is coming out of my shop. One of the issues is with the high back and with the bubble canopy, one of the choices, you really have all the choices, because I've seen Spitfires with all 3 of the major rudders, the types of rudders. This is the early one, and there's the pointy one, and then there's one that's just a little bit larger, I think, when they had the 5-bladed props they were using at. But the I-beamer, I've always liked that rudder. The construction of it, having the ribs in the back, was completely prototypical. The front part of it is built up with sheet. And so I thought, but I want to make this spit, I want to make this one the pointier version of the rudder. This, by the way, is the one we used on the Seafire. So what I was trying to figure out in my mind here, and you see, Joe is I'm sure he's back today. He's working on the wing, bringing it up into silver. I haven't touched my wing yet because I wanted to have all the body components done the next time he's here. Shells, this shell, canopy, of course, and that's in Midgley's ballpark right now. We're going to ship that to him. Then I need to make the take-apart feature, for which I've already molded up this little piece. Now, I thought, in the very beginning, I thought I was going to use this piece in one piece and then just cut it. Didn't work out that way because it splits. Back here, it just gets using one piece. But the double sheeting, 2 pieces of 16, look like they're going to work fine. So what I'll have to figure out on this, and this is the take-apart feature, includes this part, which is a molded part. Then I need to make a pattern up for the rudder. And it's always a good idea when you make a pattern for a rudder, leave the bottom maybe 1/8 of an inch more than it has to be, just so you can get a nice mate, and you can block sand that in all in one piece there. I just hate when that doesn't line up, or when you don't have a perfectly straight line, it goes back and divots down or divots up. And this is the shape of the rudder. Now, when I calculated out all my side areas here, I realized, well, the combination of the shorter nose, wider nose, the high back here, and the rudder, I think we're going to be very close to ideal. I mean, we don't have a big trade-off that I have to really worry about. Now, when the rudder gets too big, and a good example is the A26, the rudder was enormous. The plane has a tendency to weather vane. When it's too small, the plane has a tendency to yaw in maneuvers. So finding that ideal balance is, sometime you're lucky, and sometime, well, I'm not sure if we're lucky or not. Now, the Typhoon had a good balance. The Typhoon absolutely didn't have any yaw issues. It had the short nose. In fact, it was shorter than what we have now. And I think the motor was heavier, and in fact I'm sure it was heavier. But smaller side area and a thinner fuselage back, and yet it didn't have any real, that I could see, any bad habits that I really would want to correct by making the rudder bigger or smaller. And of course a lot of it is just seat of the pants, just by looking at it. And in fact, here's the Testarossa as an example. I can look at it and say, yeah, it looks like it might be a hair on the big side, but it still didn't give me any indication that it was doing something that I couldn't trim out of the plane. So when Les came up with that shape, we went with it. In fact, I didn't change it too much on the Novant. I made it about I think a ½ inch shorter. Basically used the same shape though. And that was even well within the range that we don't have trim issues. Now right there is where you have trim issues, when you have a 90 square inch rudder. John Cafaro has still got this rudder, in fact. Yeah, that can be a problem. So we're looking to keep this scale, and luckily the full-size Spitfire has a pretty good proportion. Now if you ever notice on a Strega is on the small side. When you make the rudder a little bigger, an inch bigger, or a ½ inch bigger, it gets just a little better. But remember, the original Strega was made for a 60 with a 12-inch prop, and most of the people are using 76s now. So making the rudder bigger, and I've already gone over that many times, so it's just something to keep in mind. What you're trying to do with the rudder is balance out the effect of the prop wash. You're just trying to balance it out, and that when it goes upwind, it doesn't weather vane. When it goes downwind, it doesn't become a problem, and it's not yawning maneuvers. In fact, let me do a little storyboard for a minute or two, because this is something I'm not sure everybody really understands how this works, but this I think is good quality information. Now, if you understand what we're trying to do when we come up with the ultimate rudder shape, it isn't a question of just taking a photo enlarger and making it dead scale, unless you're very lucky. There's just a little more to it than that. Let's pretend the wind is blowing in this direction. What tends to happen when a plane has a rudder that's too big is you're flying downwind. Let's put the rudder on the back. You're flying downwind, and when it gets downwind, more of the side area is behind the CG than in front, and it tends to do that and turn the plane in at you. And as you go up above 45, it gets worse and worse and worse. As you go downwind, where the lines would normally go slack, it's your best buddy. It pushes the tail out. When it's the correct size, you get a nice balance here. But again, I remember from the A26, the first time I went upwind, the plane just went. Well, it's a thing you have to trim for. Now, if you have a Raby rudder, you can kind of play with this and get this. I would always suggest putting some kind of an adjustable rudder or a Raby rudder, and never just have one choice, and it's like not having adjustable leadouts. It really limits your ability to trim the plane. Now when you make your first, and this is Joe's first take-apart plane, so there's a lot of little things we're working together on and trying to help each other, but let's explain how I feel. What I want to have is, Joe's going to have the wing in silver at some point in time, and we're going to make the take-apart feature back here, take-apart feature here, get this lined up on center. The wing will already be in silver when we do that. But what I'd like to have at that point in time, I'd like to have, for Joe's benefit, all of these issues worked out. How this take-apart feature goes, and the final rudder shape. I'm not sure if we're going to have this stab and elevator by the next visit, but this would be, so in other words, what I'm trying to do is get Joe a part that he can work on, and then work on the part that he's not working on. So when he comes back here and he has his wing in silver and fit into the body, he'll have all these little other parts that we're going to be dealing with. Or if he's going to build a different version, he'll already know what mine looks like, and he'll either be able to decide if he likes it or doesn't like it. But when you build your first take-apart plane, what jumps out at you is so much of it is pretty cut and dry and easy. But this part, you would think wouldn't be a big deal. That part that comes off the back, for some reason, takes me a lot longer than I ever anticipated. So I know ahead of time this is not going to be a 1 or 2 or a 3 night thing. I know this is something. And second of all, it has to be light. You can't just Bondo it all up. I want to make the rudder on this. I want to make the fin built up. And I want to make the rudder with prototypical ribs. So that'll hopefully keep it light. But when Joe comes for the next visit, I'd like to have this. See, Joe likes to work off patterns, so I'd like to have either patterns, or he can just take that part home with him and copy it, or whatever. And this is the thing when you're building 2 planes at once, and one guy's in Pennsylvania working, and I'm 100 miles away working on something else, and then at the end we want to marry it together. But it's still, this is the fun of doing it, the unknown, the fun of doing this. Now, I already have, I think the cowl's in the bank. I had another idea that I could put a baffle behind the end of the cowl and I'll talk to Joe if he thinks we want to do that. I also have, Dave is made a commitment to get us the canopies as soon as possible. So parts for this plane come from a lot of different places. And the spinners, this is the great unknown is, are we going to be able to use aluminum spinners if they're too heavy? I already made carbon back plates. And I've already spoken to Doran. Doran's got some new prop molds, which we don't have any sample props yet, but he's already making props, and I hope some of them are going to be 15 inches or bigger, so we can use them for testing and for on the Navanta and whatever. So the first thing I need to do is just go get out a piece of paper and make a pattern for what the rudder will be. Now, the idea also about making an accurate pattern here is so that obviously Joe can take his too. So we'll start by assuming that this line is going to carry straight back, and we'll make this a little bit bigger than it has to be by 3/8 of an inch, and get that final curve in once we have the bottom piece on. And I think that shape is pretty much right on the money. This is pretty similar, except it's of course smaller on the Seafire, but it gives us a good reference point when we make up the preliminary pattern. Of course, it's just oversized, and you can see because the fuselage is thicker, wider, in every way bigger. But it's pretty similar. It's almost very similar when you account for back there and up here. And if I remember right, it took me a whole day to arrive at this shape with French curves and all the hot scientific things you have to do to figure that out. But anyway, it looks like we have at least a starting pattern to work from. Now, taking out my magazine pictures, Seafire plans and everything, I made some very small adjustments here. And basically it's because it just didn't look right. And we're not doing a photo enlargement, but it evolved into this final version, and that'll be my pattern for the rudder. Now, what jumps right out at me is when you make the fuselage this wide, it changes what you're used to looking at. In other words, from the side view, if this was an Obler, thin, it'd have a different look. This has a much more, I think, a more realistic look. And I wanted to just make sure that this amount that I've added to the rudder, because what's happened is, I need to, and I can't really do it until I get that little block. The next step on this is going to be tomorrow to fashion up this little block. Think about how I want to do this. I want to cut the piece so I can start fashioning up this piece that'll have the rudder and this. But at least today, I got the pattern done. And I feel like I'm one step ahead now, because what's happening here, I have this shell kind of finalized, this shell finalized. That back piece needs to be cut. It's still in a mold up by the heating vent. And then I'll be ready to start working on the rudder. So one by one, we're, I guess, making some pretty good progress here, considering we're in the middle of this awful ice storm. It's just horrible out there. It's unbelievable. Now I always call this fudging, where you look at something and to make it perfectly scale, it can't really be scale. And here's one example. If you look at the scale model, the stab and elevators are shorter than the rudder itself. So what happened is ours, the rudder is an inch shorter. And what I did, I made a fake pattern just to see if it would look better with the taller rudder, and it doesn't. It just doesn't look right. So again, this is just one of those fudge things where sometimes you just have to make, and I've made 5 patterns so far, but I think I've settled in on the one that I want to use. And with that rudder size and the height of this turtle deck, see, I'm going off the original concept, the view the pilot would see, and we're right on the money. I mean, we're not off by maybe 1/8 of an inch, not even 1/8 of an inch. I mean, it's so close. Well, we're not exactly on down there, but, and I think that rudder shape, and believe me, it's a critical thing. If you don't get that rudder right at this point, once you start cutting wood and plywood and making up, in this case, it's going to be built up ribs, it's going to be very disappointing. But if we capture the look, and it's the look, no matter how you do it, it's that look that you got to go back and forth, at least I do anyway, and people with more talent probably don't. But the idea of seeing this on video is maybe that you can see how this evolves, and so if you're doing your own project, and of course we still have to carve out the griffin blisters. That is one of the examples with the rudder that we're using, and see the ribs on it. Now I want to simulate those ribs. I want to simulate, and this curve here, this is another thing that's very difficult. If we do this dead scale, because we have a take apart feature here, it's going to go through the take apart feature, and that's not a good choice. So we want to have it end, which means we got to just slightly curve that back. I don't want that curve to go through the take apart feature. I've learned a hard lesson that when you make a curve like this and there's a take apart feature, it almost always looks notchy, and I never really liked it. But no matter which rudder you choose, and this is the beauty of the Spitfire. No matter what, you got choices: bulletproof glass, no bulletproof glass, recon versions, G-fires, just the photo version that Joe does, the blue one, the one I'm kind of leaning to it too, to be honest. Now here's just one little example, and this is Rich Walbridge's Cardinal. If you're going to build a Cardinal and you know ahead of time you're going to wind up with a 76 that's going to have a 14-inch prop on it, it probably would be good to make this maybe a 1/2 inch bigger around the whole perimeter, just to add some side area, and of course have a Raby rudder at the same time. But big, remember the relationship: big prop, big rudder. When you look at all these original Cardinals, look how small that rudder is, but keep in mind, Tiger 60s really were more comfortable with between 12.5 inch props, maybe 13 with a stretch. Now Tsunami was one of the planes that had a pretty good balance, and when we'd be flying in high winds and whatnot, it seemed to be a good balance point. So I'm just trying to get all of this data and all this massaging before I start cutting wood. And of course on Australia, when we had the 76 in it, one of the first things we did was make a little bit larger rudder. Same shape, just tack on a 1/2 inch around the whole perimeter and make a Raby linkage. It never hurts, never hurts. I've never seen that have a negative impact. Now this is a plane, the Sidewinder, that I flew at the 90 Nats, and you see how small that rudder is? Well, this had a VMAX, a 46 VMAX in it, and one of the problems was, as soon as I'd go above about an 11.5 inch prop, there was no way on earth you could get the yaw out of the plane, and I had the lead outs coming out everywhere and everything in the world to try to get that to trim out, and the rudder just was too small. So that was the point at which I think I learned a valuable lesson, and I started using Raby rudders on everything. Now, as a side benefit, and one of the things that I like about having these planes hanging all over the cellar, is I'm dealing with just about the same amount of, I mean, I'm within a couple inches, square inches of what we know works good on a 90 with the big props, the big 4-blade, the big 2-blade. So we know we're close. If nothing else, we know we're close as a starting point. Let me get the phone. And this seems to be the least common on the Spitfires, and that's the one that's on the intermediate marks that just has a really wide rudder, and I don't know how many versions they actually use that on. I don't have the walk-around book here at this time. It's a clip wing version too. Now this book will be handy when I start laying out the rib spacing, because I'd like to make the ratio the same. I probably can't get the same amount of ribs, but I can get the ratio pretty close. We're not going to put a trim tab in. We'll ink that on. And this curve here, the only modification is this curve here has to end before we do the parting line. See, on the real one, it's not the same. We're going to have to cheat there a little bit. This book will be real handy when we go to do these too. I'm looking at these. These are one of the defining parts of the Griffin Spitz, and of course the exhaust stacks. We got a lot of molding work ahead of us there. I really am leaning toward that blue version. I don't know why. I don't know what about that is just capturing me lately. Here's that mid rudder. Now remember what they were doing in developing a Spitfire. Every time they'd up the horsepower, the rudders got consequentially bigger. As the props got bigger, the rudders got bigger. That's also true if you look at a P51 and you go back and trace out the history of the latest model P51s. Had the tall little extra piece of rudder. So I'm just happy today that we got the pattern ready, and that gets me a little bit motivated here to the desert version with the scoop, which probably would look cool on a model. The ones they used in Africa. There's one of the rudders on a Blenheim, a Mark IV. Looks a lot like a Spitfire, doesn't it? Like all the British planes have this very graceful, curved look. And of course the poster child for a tall, big rudder, Griffin-powered Mustang Miss Ashley with, look at the height of that rudder. I remember Bill Rich commenting on the height of my rudder out the first year I flew Miss Ashley. Oh my God, it's too big, it's too big. Well, I guess it really is. Maybe it is an eye of the beholder. So we moved the ball a little bit today. That's good. And one thing's for sure, I definitely have gotten Joe's head cold when Joe was here. It took a week, but I got it. Joe, I owe you one. Anyway, this is the part I made up. Out of 2 sheets, and the reason I want to do this, I want to put this up by the heating vent tonight. There are 2 laminations. Now when you have to mold around a very tight radius, obviously this is one way to do it. And I'm working right off Joe's buck. You can pull this up and you can see what it is. It's actually 2 shells, one inside the other. And what I'm going to do is take some aliphatic resin. Can't believe I got this cold. Sucking on these lozenges too. I want to take aliphatic resin, put this back together and put it in a mold overnight. But you can see how nice how that gets down and gets that piece just like the back of the mold. Look how nice that does it. So if we can't use 1/8 inch, I think these are going to be better than the part that we would have had if we used the part came off the mold. And there's nothing to stop you from making the turtle deck that way, or the nose section. 2 pieces of 16, as long as you aliphatic them. Okay, now, one of the things I learned when you're going to use aliphatic resin on a wood mold, some of it oozes through the wood. So it's always a good idea to just protect the Joe's handiwork here. And this is not such a precision part that the thickness of this plastic is going to make any difference at all. Now, that's the top one. It's even with the end, so this is the one I want to put the ordinary Elmer's glue is fine. I don't know if this tube is 1,000 years old. When we were using this on a model railroad, I had gallons of this stuff laying around. The nice thing about this is it dries clear too. I'm only going to put this on one side, so I want to make sure I got it covered. And this piece actually is going to be part of the structure of the model, because the rudder is going to be hooked to this, and this is going to hold that tail piece in. So I don't want to have a piece that, you know, too flimsy or whatever. So we're well along on the cowl. Cowl is done, in fact. Canopy is, except maybe for that vent, and I'll show what I was thinking of on that vent. Because see, what happens with me is I get these ideas in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping. I guess that's all part of doing it. Now I want to get the gloves off. I want to get glue on a bandage. And obviously this is what we've done 1,000 times already. And it works just as well every time. But this is one thing that we need to get this piece before we can move on. Now another thing with this, with these take-apart features, the first time I did them, I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do them. I looked at several different ways. I talked to Casminato. And I guess all the Europeans do this all the time, so it's not a big deal. But then Kaz showed me, he took his plane apart in my garage. He was in Flushing at one time. In fact, I don't want to even put the third layer on this because I want this to breathe. So I can just leave this here. Do my usual squeeze-o-matic. And put this up by the heating vent tomorrow morning. Hopefully we'll have a part. Now we're going to start at at some point in time. This shell is going to be glued in place all the way down. What I want to make sure is, as we go to the back, this is 90 degrees. And I can always run over to the belt sander if I'm not sure it is 90 degrees. I'm not sure about the back yet. In fact, the back is not 90 degrees. So we're going to run over to the belt sander now and make it 90 degrees. Now up in the front here, it's not as critical, because as we put the canopy detail in here, this will have a rib and everything else. But in the back, we're going to have an 1/8 inch light ply former back there that's going to be used to attach that back piece of the fuselage. So this piece has to be solid. Now this piece can't be off on an angle and skewed left and skewed right. So let's get this at 90 degrees first. Now the first thing I need to know is exactly, because I'm making the equivalent of a jigsaw puzzle here, I need to know exactly where this is going to end. And for our own sake, we know those two parts are going to butt up pretty nice. I want to tape this on. Doesn't have to be real fancy because I can hold it with my hand, but I need to know exactly where that part is going to end. Now I need to create an 1/8 inch light ply former that fits right inside of it. It's a perfect fit. Now I want the grain going side to side on this part, of course. I don't want to waste plywood here, so what I need to know is where these fuse sides end, and also on this side now, once I have that, and I know the total width over here, I can take this part off. And I can hold it inside. I'm not sure this is making sense, but I can get an accurate look at what this would look like. And this is a part that's going to be doing some work, so we don't want to have a in fact, I'll leave the pen line on, and that gives me, of course I only need the inside line. I want to have, if nothing else, a nice tight fit, and I want it to be that when I drop this down onto the fuselage, I have the width exactly right. Okay, so I have that little former in the back there. Now what that does, it accomplishes two things. That's going to be my pin receptacle, and I've got the width exactly right. And that'll help hold the shell in place. Now I pretty much have to do the same with the front piece. So what I did, let me show you how this is. Sometimes it isn't as obvious how to get this right. I took the 90-degree square and measured out, and this is C grain 16th. That's all you need back here is 16th C grain. That's the total width. And once I have the total width, but this had better be C grain and it better be side to side, then I can put this part on. And that's the outside of the fuselage, because I don't want to have the shells thinning themselves out here. Now I can trace this right in here. And that gives me the line that I need. I just cut this out, and I can tack glue it in here, and then that'll help hold the whole shell in place as we work on the back end. Notice what we're doing. We're starting at the front and working to the back. You know, it's nice with the two, I'll call them little bulkheads for lack of a better word. It really holds this in place. And this will give some support when we go to actually mount the canopy here. And hopefully we've got that nice and accurate. But it's just like making a big jigsaw puzzle now. We're going to start making as many of the fuselage parts as we can. Again, and it doesn't bother me one iota to work in any sequence. There's some people that think, oh, you got to build the wing first, you got to do this first, or that. I'm comfortable working however, but I know this little piece in the back is going to be labor intensive. And all of these pieces, I mean, these are nicely fit. There is no globagool on that or anything. That is a nice fit, and I just can picture carving blocks and trying to come up with that shape. I don't think so. Now with the piece in place, the trick is to see that it's a really accurate fit. And yeah, that's going to be good. Very good. Well, I think tomorrow we'll start on that little tail section and the rudder. Just trying to plan my day out for tomorrow, because you know what's supposed to happen. Snow and ice all day, and that'll be a good excuse to brew up a pot of coffee and work on the Spitfire. Well, this morning, I still got my head cold, but I'm going to try to get a couple little things done here, and one is I'm going to try to fight through this head cold One of them is get this out in the mail to Dave Midgley so he can schedule making this up or working on it. Now, in an all-perfect world, we would just be able to screw this in and pull this out, but I know that's not going to happen. Done this enough times to know. And I was going to try not to destroy the box if possible, but I know I'm going to have to cut in here some. I hope I'm not going to have to destroy the box. No, as I predicted, that ain't coming out. Now let's see if this works. I'm going to just try to separate this. Yeah, maybe the box, maybe we're going to lose the box anyway. No, we're going to have to cut the box apart. I was hoping I wouldn't have to do this, but in the worst of all worlds, I guess I'm going to have to do it. Yeah, you know what? I should know better. We're going to lose the box. So my great idea of trying to leave this in the box didn't pan out. As with many things, when we're working on something experimental, always be prepared for some little disappointment along the way, but it's not going to stop us from making a part. In fact, maybe I can reassemble a box around the outside of this. So junk off it. We certainly have used up the old molding rubber that we were looking to use up, so that's a big help. Now let's see if we can get the plug out. All right, there we go. Plug totally intact, didn't lose anything on the plug at all. And I would say even Midgley would be impressed with, well, we don't even need the box, that looks pretty solid. But I will try to assemble this box. Now what Dave is going to do is make a plug for his vacuum machine. Now I just put the box, no glue holding it together. What I want to do is just make this like a temporary. The blue tape is just there to hold it. Just in case Dave needs this box, I may as well mail it up to him to do his magic. So my little idea didn't exactly pan out, but it's not terrible either. And this is actually the way this should go. I'm sure Dave, with his experience, will figure out what has to be done here to make this some really nice canopies. And of course, it's not only canopies for Joe and I, it's for anybody else that forever is going. You could use this on a straight line stun chip if you made a wide body. Now, what allows this to happen now is we have the mold box. It's such a good fit. It gets like a suction in there. There we go. Okay, I think that's ready to go up to Dave. I'm going to have to make a trek up there because I want to get this to him as soon as possible. Anyway, that should make, well, we'll see. Should make a really good plug, and of course Dave will do all the little tricks you need to do to make it ready for the vacuum forming machine. Maybe he'll even get us some video or some pictures of the operation. Okay, the next thing, we took our shell down. This is the multiple layer of 16th. Let's see what we get out of this. It's joined with the aliphatic. And the next logical piece on this would be to set this piece up and get it in, make this piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Let me get this bandage out of here. Good idea if you're going to glue these, put some saran wrap or something on the mold. And you can see we've got quite a bend in this. No splits. And I don't know how light that is, but it almost doesn't fall to the ground. Now, next thing is we have to trim it. So I got to put it back on the mold. Get my little wood block and run it right along the edge. Now, I think it would be a good idea just to trim this piece oversized. So I'm going to push it up onto the mold a little bit more. Just would be to our advantage, and I can do a final fit there. Again, with Joe's little system with the razor blade, flat table. And it's the only way I know of you're going to get that bend in the back. I originally thought I'd have to carve this block, but using Joe's system, this works really well. Now, because I cut this piece oversized, this is going to be a little tricky. I'm going to try to hold this in place here. Just get a tangent line here. Not as easy as I thought it was going to be. Again, the trick here would probably be make it oversized. I could be a king, deer uncrowned, humble or poor, rich or renowned. And this piece is going to need a little bit of adjustment. I couldn't do if I had you. And it's because we cut it up high. And of course I'll do the same thing to both sides. Now the next thing I need to know, when I go to fit this part in, and I had to add a little wood here because I shaved it down too much. When that butts up there, I need to know the total width so that these two, where my fingers are right now, marry up. So what I need to do is just take a piece of scrap wood, find out the total length, total width. And once I know the total width, then I can take this piece, lay it on here, and it needs to get spread just a little bit, and I can trace out that inside curve. This is one of the little tricky things that has to happen. Then I'll use this for a pattern. Trace this out on light ply. And I need to make this piece up out of light ply. Now it's always a good trick when you make a pattern. I don't know if you can see, I've left the line on. I just want to do a little dry fit here with the line on, because that ensures that you're a little on the plus side. Now let's just see how much we're on the plus side. Oh, we're on the plus side by a good 1/64 of an inch. Now because this is a structural part, I really did a good job of putting a permanent glue seam in there, nice and solid. And I want to see, just we have a rough fit here. And it looks like we're on the low side by, oh, a tiny amount. Now we're going to have to cut a piece out for the stab here, so it's not really critical right now. That's not really something I have to worry about, since some of that does get cut out, but I do need to put the former in the back, and I'll do the same thing in the back. Figure out the width, figure out exactly where that former is going to go, and this one can be balsa, side grain balsa. I just want to see temporarily, we're going to have to make a fake temporary stab piece just to see roughly where that's going to go. You know, I'm going to have to make, I can see I'm going to have to make like what amounts to be a fake tail, the fake stab part here, so that I can cut this ridge, because that's the next thing, of course. But here I want to trim this off parallel and then put the back former in. Again, it's just like we're making a jigsaw puzzle. And I think the most important thing of the whole operation is just the sequencing, and if you follow step by step by step, I don't see how you can not have a good result. Now, and because I knew this ahead of time, I knew this little piece was going to take a long time to get fit, get the edges to match, get the tail post to match, and I just was prepared for the fact this was going to take a little more time. See, by looking at it, you think, oh, that's only going to take 5 minutes. And what happens, it winds up taking 2 hours. But we have it, it's fit close enough now that we're ready to go on to the next step. But because we're in the middle of, just the worst weather here, and because I have a head cold, it's time. Have another cup of that good Javalia coffee. We're one step ahead on this. What are we making, fluffadoodly? Fluff! Well, this looks good. I'll have a few of these myself. Pecans, eggs. There's some eggshells right there.
No, this goes with this. This is going to be, on this side, is chocolate chip cookies. Okay, this could come off.
I'm just going to make me a cup of coffee because I'm having so much fun downstairs with this head cold. Now, what is going to be chocolate chip fudge?
No, this is not chocolate chip fudge. This is fudge. Marshmallow fluff fudge.
See, I'm learning how to cook, but it's taken a long time because I'm not a cooker. Oh yeah, it even smells good, I'll tell you.
It smells like chocolate.
Yeah, that's good. It's like Aeropoxy Light. It looks a lot like Aeropoxy Light. Wendy, don't quit your day job. Don't quit your day job. Is that my lunch for tomorrow?
Oh yeah, all of this, right?
I'm telling you, Karen, this retirement's got to go.
What they do like is getting what they're promised, like our Smart Rate. It's a 30-year fixed mortgage. Just
now the next step on this, we need to cut the fuselage right here. And I need to plot this. In other words, I know where this side is. Now what I need to do is just cut up, and let's see how I can do this the most convenient way. I guess this will allow us to get it pretty close. And this is why I say this little piece in the back, it scares you when you think how long it takes you to make it. But when it's done, it's done. And then it's cruise time. This is really the most difficult or the most time consuming. This little piece that holds the rudder and the tail. Of all the parts that are tricky, that's probably it. Now I'm looking down that former, it looks like it might not be in there exactly straight, but it doesn't really matter. Now we'd like to cut this and have this angle be as close to 90 as possible, just so it's one's not off the other way. And so when I trace them out and look down at the former, this should be, and whenever I say should be, usually means maybe it will, maybe it isn't. Now what I want to do, and in case this is not exactly 90, I want to correct it right now, and now it's 90. The more I can keep this parallel and square, it's actually only out on both sides the same. Now the former that's going to go in here is going to be our take-apart former and our tail wheel mount all at the same time. So we get one former to do two separate jobs, and that's what we're trying to do, is maximize minimize the amount of parts. I don't want to have a separate tail wheel mount and a separate bulkhead because all these parts are light ply. It's to our advantage to try to figure out how to make one part do two jobs. Now, because I just have these relatively tacked in, I can pull this out and make sure this is now exactly even here. This is one thing, because I want to have a surface, a mating surface here. So even if this is out a couple of thousandths, it's going to show, and I don't want to have it uneven in any way. Oh, I love these tips. And what I'm going to do at this point in time is just harden up this whole edge here. So I'm working off a hard edge. Now you notice a lot of parts of this. We have a part that acts as a jig, as a fixture, and later on gets cut out of the plane, or in this case it gets moved, gets fine-tuned. It's that sequencing of parts that once you have that down pat, it's just a production job. But in the beginning, when I was figuring this out the first time, I was thinking, even though I had seen Casmanato's plane, I said, does that go before that? Or they put that screw in there? So that sequencing, if you just go step by step by step, I think you have a big advantage over somebody just throwing darts in the dark. Now, in making up the tail wheel, a couple of things. A little lesson I learned the hard way many times. I used to try to make the tail wheel wire at a 16th or 075, and what would happen every time somebody launched a plane that wasn't skilled, it'd bounce up and break the prop, and it was difficult in the stooge too, the way my stooge releases. So I committed myself, not long ago, I don't remember when, that I would always make the tail wheel wire 093. Now, what I did is I filed it flat on the part that's going to face the bulkhead, and I want to really carefully here lay this out, because what I have to do once I lay this out is I'm going to drill a lot of little tiny holes in here and sew this on with copper wire. Now you're probably looking at the video and saying, Wendy's gaining weight. Wonder why. Ooh, that looks good. Now what is this again? Tell me what it is. Chocolate?
Chocolate chip, pecans, almonds, and hazelnuts.
Oh, that's good. I'm sewing up my tail wheel, but I'm so overwhelmed with the cookies. There's the old tail wheel getting ready to be the next step. Now what's going to have to happen, this side is going to be a flat surface, so I'm going to add an additional piece of light ply, which this will now be the back of our take-apart feature. I'm just not going to take a chance that this is not going to, with this wire here, is not going to make a good surface. Plus it'll add a little rigidity to this, and I know I've had enough planes where it had a springy, spongy tail wheel. It makes you crazy, and you're always afraid then to let somebody else launch the plane. So this I hope will work out just the way we want. Oh, I just wanted to marry this up. I glued this in. See, I needed this part to be flat, that extra little piece of light ply. And I just want to make sure we have a reasonable joint. The thickness, the fit, everything like that is fine. So I would say, and I don't know for sure, that from this point on, we're going to have to make up the rudder, of course, and I'm trying to plan for our next session already. because we got a lot of errands due to the fact we're in the Christmas holidays, but it'll give me some time to think about how I want to proceed to the next steps. Now this morning I woke up really early because I wanted to get started working on a plane. I have my ulterior motive here because the girls are going to want to wrap all those plates that we've been making up and all the clear finishes on them now, and they're ready to wrap up and deliver to their lucky recipients. But anyway, in today's mail, first thing this morning, I got a package from Don Herdman. This is Don's P40. You might recognize it from Brodax. We were able to help him with a little bit of an engine issue that he had. He sent us his beautiful tape about how it is in Vermont. We're up where he lives. He lives in a beautiful part of Vermont. Took some nice pictures of his shop. The only thing, it's on 8mm and I can't convert it, so he'll be sharing that with us as soon as his son can convert it over. I had to mail it back to him, but in the meantime, I sent him up a couple of the tapes we have, and one of them that has the P40 development from World War II, the real P40. It was a great exchange, and of course Don is from the New York area originally, Long Island. When he moved to Vermont, we didn't think we'd see much of him, but he's back, and good to have him back too. A great guy, and we really enjoy the fact that we can share these things. Of course, we go to Vermont every year, of course, one of our favorite places, and of course sharing things through the DVDs and videos. Anyway, from Don Herdman. And we'll be hearing from him maybe later on in this tape or in the next one. So this is one of the things we have to gear our whole day around here. Rather than just having a day of modeling, well, we're going to have a day of a couple of things, but one of the things is this is that gold stippled finish. It's now got clear on top of it that protects it. So we're going to find out how this is going to work out. The girls are going to wrap that later this afternoon, so I only got a couple hours to work here, and I thought I'd take advantage of it early. Now the first couple of times I did this part of the job, I really made it a lot harder than it had to be. And I've come up with, after doing it several times on several different ships, including the twins of course, I came up with my own little sequencing of how I thought this would be the easiest to do. And the easiest thing is getting the bolt in so that this piece is on permanently. Now once this piece is on permanently, and I have the alignment and everything lines up, then I can attach this piece. So now this piece starts to look like this. And then the last thing is I have to locate a pin up here and drill a hole very, very precise. I've got everything here lined up, so I want these two to line up with that pin. Then I'm going to have to cut a piece out, make a fake piece of a stab, and put that piece in there so I can get a finish on both sides. But if you do it that way, then the last thing is I have this piece in my hand. And I want to explain this ahead of time, because if you start doing it some other way, if you build this rudder first and it just gets out of control and you can't fit everything up. So if you start it, it's like when we attach shells, I try to start at one end of the ship and work to the back. Not start in the middle and get to both ends and they're both wrong. Well, I don't know if that information will be of some value, no value, or whatever, but the first part is I have to tape this in position, and once this is in position, I have to make that little hole for the tube so I can get in there and mark where I want to have the bolt. But the first decision is I got to figure out where I want that bolt. Now I need to know, and I purposely left the way I bent the tail wheel wire so I could get the blind nut right in the position I want. But here's what happens. If you put the blind nut, the bolt way down low, it's not effective. The top starts to get loose. If you put it way too high, the bottom gets loose. So I found out there's probably a point, and it's a little bit further down than up, that this is effective. And so what I'm going to try to do is measure the point at which, and then drill this hole in from here, but I got to transpose it out here first. So I know an example, and I got to get the edges on this, of course. What happens is if that bolt is off center side to side, this tends to do this. If it's off, if I put the bolt way up here, this will tend to do this. If I put it at the bottom, it'll do that. So I'm going to try to centrally locate it, but I've got to locate it around that wire. So once I locate that, then I can transpose that number out onto here. Now I just want to double check that I've come up with a good compromise here, and it looks like a little bit less. Now the reason I put the tape on there is because I can't really see in there exactly the way I want. I was going to try to get it at 1 5/8", but it looks like 1 1/2 is how far in it's going to go. Yeah, 1 1/2. So I know I want this bolt up 1 1/2 from the edge, and of course on center if possible. Now before I can actually fit this up really accurately, I have to establish a flat surface on both sides so that these two parts come together, because once I resand that, these parts are going to move. So anytime I'm working on a flat surface, I want to have both parts, when I tighten this bolt, that they tighten up reasonably well. I don't want to have to shim them or add material if possible, but of course if I have to, I have to. But it's just easier. It's easier to work on this early on. The earlier on you can get these surfaces to mate. Even if you're just building a ship that just has a cowl, the surface mating part of it, the sooner it can happen, the better. Okay, now I need to measure the height of this bolt, which is 1 1/2. Go out here 1 1/2. And this is where I'm going to put my entry tube so that my Allen wrench can go in there and tighten that bolt. I want to have it at the same height. I don't want a wrench going down on an angle or up on an angle if possible. Now what I do is I take a piece of this tubing. Let's see what size this is. It's 7/32. The reason I like 7/32, the head of the Allen bolt fits through there, even though we're not going to need that. But when I made it smaller, it gets a little awkward getting a wrench in there. This gives us enough room. I need to roughen this up, scratch it up as much as possible. Take a knife blade and take this end of it and turn it into a cutter. Just make the front end sharp. Now the idea is, and sometimes you get this on the first shot, sometimes you don't, I want this tube to line up. So I got to kind of look from the top. I want to hold it parallel on this angle. See how I'm twisting it in there? I'm going, look from the bottom. Am I getting close to that hole? So I'd like that to hold my wrench right in position. Needs a little more of an angle, and you can just adjust it, of course. Okay, now I only need that much of the tube, so I don't want to, let me get a pen. And it's a lot easier to cut this before you put it in. Now that zona saws right off very easily. And one thing I don't want to do is have too much of this hanging out that I have to Dremel it off or sand it down. I'd like to have it as close to being fit as possible before I glue it in. Now the last little bit we'll just sand off. Okay, so that's ready. Now the next thing I have to go over to the drill press, drill this hole with a 120, a 1/8 drill. Now I can take a piece of 1/8 inch wire that just has a point filed on it. Let it stick through the hole that I've just and this gives me a good alignment, a good starting place, that I don't get this tube in here crooked. Now I can see already I don't have enough of an angle on it, and believe me, it's easier, let me just show this up close, it's easier to do this sand that angle down a little bit before we put it in. Alright, many times I'd get this, so a quarter of an inch was sticking out, and it was always easier while I have the tube in my hand, get a little more of the angle. Won't get it perfect, of course. And now when I really get this in position, the wire's holding it in position, so it's going to hopefully act as an alignment tube. In other words, when I go to put the 440 wrench in there, it'll help guide it into position. Now I need to have a little more, just a little more sticking out. I guess that's probably as close as I'm going to get it. Now I'll just let the wire hold that in position while the glue kicks off. Get a tack of glue on it from the inside. And once that kicks off, I'll sand that, but it should be in pretty good alignment. Now when this is roughed in as this is now, you see the way I know it's roughed in, I have the complete OD of the tube shiny. And a couple of coats of thin CA around this will protect it in case I miss with that wrench or when I'm taking it apart. It's really just for the longevity of the plane. Now, on some planes you might want to put this in some other place, but I found the best place to have this is right here. And when I've tried to get it on the bottom or some other place, it's been a lot more awkward than having it right there. Now with this piece taped in what I think is an accurate place, next part of this is going to be make sure it's accurate, make sure this contour is exactly what we want, because once we locate this bolt, it'll be a lot easier to make this adjustment right now. Now I have the same piece of wire. I need to find where that hole is, and see, I can find the plywood and I can find the hole. And that should put a good enough mark on there that I should get an accurate drilling. Now I can just drill that out for the blind nut and we should have a pretty accurate fit. Now I don't want to forget, as I tighten this bolt in, just get a drop or two of oil on the part of the nut that has the threads. Then we can safely put some glue around it. I got the forceps just holding the blind nut till it comes into position. This should draw it in just the way it should be. And we'll put a couple of drops of thick CA on there. That should do it. Now one of the reasons I always make this tube big enough to hold the head of the bolt, because you never know if it's going to be convenient to get in here when you're putting a model back together. And sometimes you have to put a little bit of CA on a bolt, but here's the whole idea, is you can put the bolt on the end of this and you're ready to put the plane together. Now what it's going to mean is I need to get in there. The washer that I normally put inside here, I'm going to have to glue in position because I can see I can't really conveniently get my finger in there. It's too narrow. So to do this, it's a lot easier. Let's get the bolt out of there. I'll position this washer in there no matter how inconveniently it is, and get that a couple of drops of CA to hold that washer in position. Then all I'll have to deal with when I take this model apart, even in the worst of all worlds, if you just put a tiny drop of thick CA or something on there to hold it in position. That's the whole idea of having that it just goes in and out and it lines it right up for you. So that's worked well for me. If the model were a little bit wider, I could get my finger in there conveniently. Well, and I still may, because I'm going to put some lightning holes in this when the part is all done. But this is a good system, but I still need to glue this washer on the inside. Now I just tacked that washer and I just pushed it in position. Put some thick CA around it. As soon as that kicks off, then we'll assemble this and this will be bolted in position. Now that when it's in a position and these surfaces are all true, then I can attach this top piece. Now with this piece fit, and I had to add a little shim up here just to get this perfectly level, trued the bottom up. Now I'm ready to install this piece. Now I'm going to tape this in position at first before I glue it. Tape this in here, make sure everything is lined up, nothing's crooked, and then tack it front and back. Then once I'm sure, take it apart, I can glue it from the inside and from the outside. Now it's this area here that I want to have at least in as good alignment as possible. And what happens is every time you go through this, there's little adjustments to be made. I'm constantly anyway. I can see I've got to have to take about a 64th off the back to true that up. But that's why if you use this method that I use, or system, or whatever you want to call it, you really have a good shot at getting it right very quickly without having a lot of disappointment. Now, I always like these kind of things to tack them on. Make sure that's even. I remember one time, I don't remember one of the bombers or something, I wound up gluing it in place and thinking, what was I thinking? Now this is just one drop, one drop. Because if it's wrong, I don't want to have to go back and cut the whole thing apart if there's something out of alignment. So far it looks like it's okay though. But you never know when you pull a piece apart, you got to put it back together and it doesn't fit. Can happen. Now it looks like we have a real good preliminary fit. See, and here's what you can't do ahead of time. You can't get all these edges and everything sanded in the final shape until you locate the pin. This has to be held in place and pinned before any of these edges really matter. See, now with the part in my hand rather than on the plane, it's a lot safer because none of this thin CA is going to wind up running down into the fuselage and gluing something that you don't want glued. And I guess the first or second time you do it, you really get a clue right away not to do it. But in the meantime, if you can learn ahead of time, even better. Now just as an example of one of the things we have to fine tune, and there's always little things to fine tune, as this came out just a little bit wide, a little bit longer. Now this back piece needed a little truing up, and as I go along, I try to true up constantly. Anytime I see something that's a 64th out, this surface here, they're always out a couple of swipes of the sandpaper. But the more I can get it done before it's all put together, and then we'll have that final sand out. But getting everything trued up now is just a little bit of an advantage. And the beauty of a take-apart plane is these parts are in your hand, they're not awkward to sand. Especially when it comes to the finishing part of this. Okay, we're ready to locate the pin now. What I'm going to do is just drill a hole. Same piece, take a little piece of music wire, put a radius on one side. It's just 1/8 inch music wire. So I can get a nice tight fit and put a little bit of a point on the front of it. I don't even need a point, but just a radius so that this will plot me a little spot that I can drill in the back of the fuselage, and it'll be like a self-aligning thing. Now I've got just enough of a little radius on here. Now that that's in place, I can glue that in permanently. Now I got the pin in there. I left it a little longer than it has to be, so I could radius it off if I have to. Let's see if this ink marker thing will work. Sometimes the Sharpies work better. I'm going to get this lined up accurately. Alright, it left an impression where that, right there, where we have to drill a hole. We have to take a break because the girls are back in plate mode.
Oh my God.
Aren't you impressed?
I am way impressed.
You better be impressed. This cost me my life.
So gorgeous.
Okay, go away from everybody.
Go away. I'm going to work.
He's on antibiotics, please step right.
Yeah, I'm on drugs.
Oh.
All right, it looks like today the girls are going to finish up the plates, and I got a little more time here. Work on this back section. Oh, those plates, boy, they came out nice. Now we're back to do this. Hey, I hope those things are going to come out nice too. I'm sure they are. Now, what I did, I put a little brass bushing in there too. I just oversized the hole, put a little piece of tubing, one size bigger than 1/8 inch. Because in the past, what had happened, as time goes by, this took a beating and it got elongated, and then this part, of course, does this. It starts getting loose. So keeping a tight fit up there is one of my priorities. Now, we can't final fit this because the shell isn't glued on. Can't final fit this, but this joint back here will not change. So I can do, once I put the bolt in, I can final sand this joint in, but only this joint. This one up here is going to wait until we have the shells permanently on. But little by little, if you go step by step by step by step, I hope by the end of this session we're ready that we can at least just lay out the rudder. And I'm trying to picture this in my mind, how this is going to look. And I wanted this piece not to go past, see, if this piece goes past here and you have a joint in here, it's a real deal breaker, it's a real problem. And the main thing to remember here is now that this is keeping this from moving back and forth, but back here, this should be as solid as a rock now, in which this is. Now I can take the long sanding block, and I'm just working up to here. And do the same thing on the other side. This is just a roughing in. You know, it's hard to plan this day out because I don't know how many other things are going to come here with this plate operation that we have. There's still a lot of work to be done at the plate factory. But if I can get this ready for the rudder in this session, I'll be real happy. Now this can be trued up. Now while I got this in all taped together in a rough form, there's a couple other things I have to check and make sure I have this as a constant straight line. Because even if this is out just a little bit, I think you're going to see it right away. Now one of the things, and Joe commented on this, is he wanted to have the back of the fuselage thinner by maybe some 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, or whatever. But I left mine thick. But when I see how much of this turtle deck is on an angle, I think that's really going to look pretty thin in the back. Maybe I'm wrong. And of course it depends on the rudder. When we got to get the look when we have the rudder on there. But this, for all purposes, is roughed in now. We can't do any final sanding here until this is all finalized, and I can't put that on until I insert the wing in the fuselage. The only thing left I can do here, I can get the bottom piece that's going to go here attached so that I can final fit the bottom of the rudder. What's going to happen? Where's that rudder pattern? what's going to happen with this rudder pattern is at the bottom, if I don't have this piece fit in, I won't be able to get this nice curve and transition in here. So I ought to fit that up. I'll go look for a piece of scrap right now. Now this is the kind of thing that a lot of times I have to go back and forth with, because that little piece down there is going to make getting that bottom edge just perfect, and that's what I want to do. And I can't do the final little bit of sanding on this, obviously, till I get everything permanently installed, but I want to confirm that that's the rudder shape that I want, that I'm not going to want to change it later or make it smaller or bigger or whatever. And again, we anticipate using big props on this, or multi-blades or 4 blades, so if we're wrong, having a rudder a tiny bit bigger isn't going to hurt anything, that's for sure. I think we've got the look, and from the million times I've looked at this, every time I look at it, it looks a little bit different. I think that's going to look fine. And it's just like, I don't know, like an artist looking at his palette or something all day. And it's really starting to see what's nice about this. This is really starting to look like an airplane and feel like I'm working on an airplane, not working on plates or anything. Anyway, I'll get that little piece on there, and then I'll be able to make a final decision on that rudder. But I really feel happy with the way this is all coming together now. And it's coming together very close to the vision I had, and I hope the vision that Joe had. No, I actually found a piece here, a 3/8, that I can make the whole bottom out of. It's got a big chunk out of it, so it won't matter back here, because I'll cut that piece from out here. I'll just trace that out, because I only need to have this piece on now. But as long as I'm cutting that piece, I may as well block out the bottom piece and put this aside, because this will be exactly the same width as this. I can get one step ahead, even though I can't carve and sand it, do any real shaping on it. I'll have the piece of wood already blocked out in an inventory. Now what happens after a while, this pin and this little brass bushing kind of made up real nice, so this goes on and off. It just takes, I guess it's like a wear and tear thing. It goes on nice and straight. Like I said, if you can see what you're doing. We've got the joints pretty well done there. Pretty satisfied with that. So the next step on this is going to be to lay out this bottom piece. And I can use the end of this wood that somebody took a bite out of. It looks like somebody took a bite out of that anyway. Okay, now by having this little block a little bit oversized, it's going to give me a couple of choices. The bottom of this is going to be rounded, but of course as that goes up the fuselage, that half curve turns into a flat, or an almost flat. So, but back here where it's going to join the rudder, I want to develop that curve and get it as close as I possibly can. Because as I'm joining the rudder to this, nothing is going to be more critical than where this joins. If this joins, and this is an 1/8 inch down or an 1/8 inch up, it's going to look terrible. So that's one of the real things that I have to really pay attention to while I'm working on this now, is not get too diverted. And having that piece for the bottom, I didn't realize that was such a good piece of wood. Actually, it's a decent piece of wood. We are really groveling with wood here. It's terrible. Now, a lot of times what I like to do here is, again, because I'm always trying to keep the dust down in the house whenever possible for Karen's benefit. But the girls are having a great time with those plates. I had no idea that was ever going to turn out that successful. And the last thing is the rudder post to get this trued up. Now this curve that's going to be on the bottom of the fuselage is, the bottom of a Spitfire is not the same shape as the top. It's a very gradual curve here, so I want to try to replicate that where it has almost a little flat on the bottom. And the last thing is to get this curve exactly how I want it. Now I just have this tacked on. Untack it, hollow it out. This is going to be a very critical blend where this back end tapers down into the rudder. Funny how your hand can always pick up a little flaw or a little imperfection and your eye can't. So easy to fool an eye, a human eye. Unbelievable. Okay, I got pretty close to the curve I want. I'll just take this over to the bench and hollow it out. There's the phone. Now that phone call was Mike Kajeski, and it looks like our day will take a new turn. I'll finish this. He's going to need a ride over to the motorcycle shop. He needs me to go follow him. So, well, this is how unpredictable life can be here on the Ponderosa, but I think the girls are just about finished. So while Mike's on his way over here, I'm just going to put this piece away for now, work on this later. He lives about 10 minutes from here, so it'll be a good 10 minutes before he gets back. Anyway, we got our little birch bark canoe all settled up here. That's ready to put on. Let's see what the plate manufacturers are doing.
How they look?
I'm going to be gone for a while. Mike Kajeski's motorcycle broke down. He needs a ride to the bike dealer in Ridgefield, so... Look at you girls are going wild. I'm telling you. I wish I could be part of this.
You'll have to come back and see the finished
Look at
product.
this. Unbelievable. Did this turn out to be a fun project or what?
Absolutely.
Even though we had our little failure there in the beginning.
Yes.
Thank
little-
you for doing our project.
No problem. Hey, that's why I'm going to be husband of the year.
What he did when he.
Now she doesn't want this on video. I know. Chris, I'm putting it on video anyway.
He was fooling around with the computer.
He was fooling around.
And he ended up getting a new screensaver. He has a purple
I
plate.
turned the purple plate into a screensaver. I don't even know how the hell I did it.
He has no idea how that happened.
I was trying to fool around with a file. It's the file that has these plates. All right, girls, I'm going to see Mike Kajeski.
Okay, come.
Tell
Man.
me to say hello.
Wendy, please.
Oh, you'll hear him when he pulls up with the motorcycle. Look in the mirror here. Poor Mikey. He is freezing. I had 30 years of doing what he's doing, riding when there's snow on the ground. Not for me. Wave to the crowd, Mike. He'd be glad to get in this car when he gets rid of this motorcycle. Oh, man.
234454.
See, this is one reason I love model aviation a lot more than freezing.
Gift for the
Now,
holidays.
in this day and age, every teenage kid has a ninja bike. Hey, Kajeski's got a bike. Wendy's got a bike.
Absolutely extraordinary photographer.
I don't know.
He's got a new collection of pictures.
And boy, are they expensive when they break. These modern bikes are not like the old ones.
Girls, and he joins us now. Hi, Pat.
Look at his face. The face of motorcycling. You should be flying your Cardinal. The hell with this motorcycle. Oh, Mikey, you should be making stooges. What a guy, what a guy. So what is this? This is your son-in-law's bike? It was your son-in-law? I never even seen this thing till today. Oh my God, it's one of those fake Harleys. She at least made him get you a real Harley if he's gonna buy one.
It's nice, but you know, let it
Yeah,
lay-
well,
let
you
it
should have put it in my garage is what you should have done.
Let it lay so long.
Yeah, how old is this?
It's a 2000.
2000? Oh, it's not that old.
Oh,
Nice paint. Paint's nice on it.
it's not bad. It's a little scratched up here and there, but you know,
Now, did he ride it a lot or?
no, he let it lay for
He
2
just
years
let it
when
lay
they-
down,
when
huh?
They sent him away. It was away. He was away for 2 years. It laid. These guys cleaned it up, but
It's running
Yeah, it
better.
still doesn't run right though, huh?
It's still not right.
All right, so these
So Mike is all set, but what? How many of these did you guys make?
28, look.
28. Let me see, and you put up, oh my God, they look nice. Oh, that's fabulous. Too bad we can't get you interested in something I can use to make money. Productive. Can we sell these? How about eBay?
Oh, this one has
They really do look
nothing.
nice.
This has no balls. Have any balls left over?
So here you are, it's motorcycle rescue and Christmas ornaments for Wendy today.
This one.
While the Spitfire sits on the back burner.
Oh my goodness.
So we did get some work on this today. I got the little piece rounded in, it's all hollowed out, but basically this is the end of the day. And we're going to live to fight another day on Spitfire production. But we got those plates really do look good. I got to give my wife credit. She's the girls next door and Karen between them, they're making me feel young again. Well, we wake up this morning and I'm telling you, this is not funny at all. It is really cold out here. And the snow, what started out to be 3 inches of snow is now coming into rainy ice, and everything is a mess. And we have, you know, our friends Art and Mona had to go to Florida for, her dad is on his deathbed. They might be gone for a week or two, and we have to take care of their house and dog. So I have an extra house to shovel and take care of their 2 dogs and cat. But you know, they always took care of Chicky when Chicky was alive, so we don't really mind doing it. But boy, we got to get up early. I got to get all this shoveled. I don't think we're going to get a lot done today. Look at the birds are even out there early this morning. Ooh, that wind is biting. Oh. So these are our friends Art and Mona, who watched Chicky when he was a baby, so we owe them some dog sitting. And look at this, it's turned into an ice storm. Everybody's got their snow blowers out. Oh my God, my nose is running. Ah, where are these doggies?
Upstairs.
Ah. Come on, guys, it's time to eat. You're all soaking wet from the snow. Look at this, look at this. Hey, hey, cat, come on. Yeah, let me dry them off. They were out in the snow in the back. Oh.
Here you go. You dry them.
This is the kitchen where Chicky learned how to fly. What a nostalgic moment in our life when we came back from Brodax. And Mona had Chicky over here and she let him go and he flew right to me. I was standing right where Karen is. Hey doggies. Hey doggies, I don't know if I like this baby doggy sitting. I could be working on my Spitfire, you know.
Yeah.
I could be home watching the Giants lose. I could be watching something. Oh my God.
Now watching the Jets lose.
Oh, the Jets are going to get killed today.
Giants.
All right. And these dogs get premium food. Look at this. Look at them mixing carrots for them. Look at this. Mincing carrot, you know, she doesn't take this long to make my salad. What's wrong with this picture?
I have to give
Look at this gourmet food. I don't believe this.
Because you're
Look, and they each have a separate spot. Look at this. It's unbelievable. He has a separate spot.
Tango, where are you?
Oh,
Here, Tango.
hey, meow.
Here, honey. Come here, sweet dog.
Oh my God, look at this.
That's yours.
Look at this gourmet food. I love this. There you go.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, I did Mike's driveway before. He's out there just doing the sidewalks. What a mess. Good day to work on Spitfires. Oh, it's the kind of day. It's just so good to be home now. We took care of all our dog sitting stuff. And boy, warm up that coffee, Karen. Warm it up, baby. Now, I got this in an email today, and I'm going to go through it real slow, so if anybody wants to copy it. This is very cool. Now, this came from Ken Strobel in a hot link. And when you go to the hot link, you see it has all these choices of planes. And what happens is, it's pretty neat. When you click onto them, it shows you the cockpit detail for each one. Now, since we're going to be doing a cockpit detailing very soon, it's good to see what a real cockpit would look like. This is a B-26. And it's just one. I'm just going to click on one or two of these, and it shows you the well, the location of the instruments, if that were relevant. Doesn't look like the co-pilot gets any instruments here. Or what the floor, the throttle quadrants would look like. Very, very interesting site to browse through. I spent quite a bit of time browsing through this. And thanks a lot from Ken. Just as an example, this is a P-38 canopy. Cockpit detailing. They're pretty cool. You could browse through them. I'm not going to go through too many of these, but some of the modern planes are, there's 1,000 things you got to look at. That is very cool. Anyway, again, thanks to Ken, we've added one cool little detail to our, we're going to be doing, by the way, we're going to be doing what I think is a really detailed canopy, and as I'm doing it, I'm going to try to take pictures to make a real detailed Control Line World article with photos for every step. So I'm hoping my photo skills get better, of course. And as we speak, Midgley has received the, hopefully going to, in the week to come, be able to mold us up some canopies. He's got the plug up there and the rubber mold that we made. Very cool. Picture just sitting here. P-38. That is nice. And one last one. I just thought I'd put this on. This is a World War I bomber. Oh man. An MB-2. Look at the difference. Look at how few instruments they had. Fuel shutoffs. Wow. And the guy out in the front. I've always liked thinking about what that guy out in the front with the machine gun was thinking with props about 1/4 of an inch from his head. Especially wooden props. Anyway, very cool. And again, thanks to Ken. Now, whenever I'm feeling a little doubtful whether I've made the right choice in spending as much time as I do on model aviation, I always look at this website, Wrecked Exotics. This is some website, and they show the latest Wrecked Exotics. That is obviously was a Testarossa at one time. You can see the venting. Oh my God! When I look at this, and then I see that Ferrari movie, oh my God! Can you imagine if this guy lived to tell about this? What he's thinking? Oh man! Now today, the time I have, I was thinking there's two things I'd like to do. I need to make what amounts to be a fake tail, fake stab and elevate a piece so I can slot that out accurately. And then I wanted to lay out the rudder. And I wanted to do, on a real Spitfire, the front part is aluminum, and the back part, of course, the top is aluminum. Then there's ribs in the middle, and it's aluminum on the bottom. So what I wanted to do is try to get an accurate, or as accurate as possible, rendition of that. I already made up a pattern that I think is pretty close, but we may need to tweak it as this evolves. And I always did like the look of the rib rudder. The front part, I thought this was a pretty good rendition of it, but we're going to try to up the bar even a little further on this. I've got an idea how I want to do this, and if it pans out, great. If it doesn't, we'll have to do it over again. Now, I spent quite a bit of time interpolating a couple of things to get this curve so it would end where I wanted it to, and also to get this piece that it fits on relatively nicely. So once I cut the stab location, I need to cut out a piece of this just so I'll know exactly where the stab is going to be, because in here we're going to have to make a little bit of a fillet. And that allows us then to see how this is going to look in full scale and use the pattern, whether we're going to downsize it, upsize it, tweak it, whatever. But this was the critical thing on this shaped tail, because if this ends even 1/4 of an inch up onto the fuselage, the whole thing goes down a drain. Now this is just a paper cardboard outline of the tail that we have so far. Still has to be modified ever so little because it's not wide enough back here, but that's not something I have to deal with right now. What I have to do is, and I can see that this is basically the whole length, I may as well make a piece the whole length, but I only need to make it sticking out 1/4 of an inch on each side, so that when this is in place, I can get this notch cut. And cutting this notch accurately is not as easy as you think. So what I need to do is just make the length. I realize right now all I need to do is make the length. This piece won't be long enough. It'll be 5 inches total. I'll have to join. Actually, I can cut a piece out from this end so I don't have to waste any wood. And this is just to set up the spacer. Now with these pieces joined, and again, we're going to make the stab and elevators exactly the same as they are on the I-beamer, out of 1/4 inch C grain, and we have that wood, and I checked the thickness. This is very close to being the exact thickness. Now what I need to get exact on this is, I need to leave out the thickness of the horn here. And this will give me, I hope, a pretty good idea now. Because I marked this up, maybe Joe can use this too, he won't have to make this part. I want to just put what a similar radius on the front of this. It doesn't have to be real accurate because at this point in time we're not doing an accurate fit, we're just getting this roughed in. And again, all the little sequences of part A goes in before part B before C, or whatever, these all really pay off in the final product. Now I don't need to have that accurate because we build that little part, we build up at the very end and get that fit. That part attaches to the fuselage. But anyway, this shows us where this stab is going to ultimately wind up. Now the purpose of this is, I just want to just put that in position for right now. It's actually just going to act as a spacer. It's going to allow me to take, and I'm going to do it in very small pieces. See, I have to take the thickness of this tail off of this piece. So I'm going to very carefully measure this up, because this will be a parallel line. And I need to take the same amount off the front, and I need to take the same amount off here. And it'll be exactly this thickness. So it'll allow me to make that cut. But up here it has to go right around, because the little radius is going to have to go on this piece here to really work out the way I'm comfortable doing it. Now just as an example of how that worked out on the Ferrari planes, that little half radius on the top, but of course this is a 1/2 inch tail, we're going to be using a 1/4 inch tail. And in this case I think the 1/4 inch tail is going to be a whole lot more scale. It gives us another choice that we normally don't have. We have the longer tail moment and smaller tail that combined will be more scale, I think. Now I can hold this nice and even here. And I know I have to leave the line on. Now it's going to be this whole part that has to get taken away. This whole piece around the whole perimeter to actually make room. It's just going to displace that material. And in the end, what's going to happen is this is going to slit right back down there. But what I'm going to do is take it out with a brand new blade and leave the line on, not take the line off. Now I think it's always easier, at least it is for me, to leave a little extra material on, go right up to the line, leave the line on, and I can really remember back doing the first one of these, and I had the horse before the cart before the horseshoes, and it took an incredible time. It seems like each one gets a little easier, but it's still a time-consuming part, and there's no substitute for just taking a little bit off each time until you have the fit that you're happy with. Now this is the part that can be time-consuming, usually is time-consuming, we're assuming at some point in time we're going to have a pattern with 3 bolts holding this tail on. What I have to do now is I have to take this piece and I have to allow a little bit of a tunnel for those bolts to go through. So I marked up where this is going to go, and I'm just going to Dremel out that amount of wood because those bolts will be sticking up here, and then I want to slide this directly in place. Now, the first time I did this and I didn't take into account the bolts, I got all done painting the plane. I went to put the tail on and well, of course that's how you learn this stuff. Anyway, I smell something in the house. Either the house is on fire or Karen's cooking again. I'm getting hungry. I just can't resist. I got to go up there and smell. Something's cooking, literally. So tell us, Mrs. Ertnowski, I was down there trying to model, and I heard, here I am trying to work for the RAF. Look at this is like I can't believe this.
Cookie factory.
I'm going to explode by Christmas.
How many have you eaten?
Oh, I can't confess on video.
No.
I've had a few. Actually, I'm about 5 pounds over my gross
I didn't even get on the scale.
fat boy in the winter weight.
I didn't even get on the scale this morning.
Oh, don't forget the scale till after New
The
Year's.
problem is Cookie Patrol. You know,
Yeah, Cookie Patrol, I hear you. Doggy Patrol, Cookie Patrol.
Every time you pass the cookies,
Yeah,
it's like
I
they
know.
call you.
I know. They've been talking to me all morning.
Yeah, so these are for...
How many, seriously, how many cookies do you have here altogether? There got to be 1,000.
I don't know. Well,
Unbelievable.
Hopefully there'll be a lot less.
Unbelievable.
There'll be a lot less.
So you're enjoying your new granite kitchen, huh? Oh my God.
Where's my ribbon?
Karen, this is truly a Christmas we should all remember and be thankful for, but my plane isn't getting done on schedule here. I'm eating too many cookies. Anyway, back to the factory. I never have had a Christmas like this in my life. We have really enjoyed every part of it. Now, because the part that we're doing is going to be fiberglassed in the center and double tissued, it's going to be a little thicker than the wood because of the finish. The finish adds a few thousandths. But I want to start with something that's a tight fit. I don't want to have a big gap in it I have to fill. See, that's nice and solid now. So I think I've left the line on, and it looks like that's about as good as it gets. Now when I take this part out and I put the bolt in, you can see what I've got. I've got, except for the radius in the front, I've located the stab. It's right on the datum line. It should be at 0 incidence. And I know there are counterpoints to having everything 0, 0, 0, but I put everything at 0, 0, 0. And that's the way this Spitfire is going to get built. So anyway, we're ready to lay out the rudder. I'm very much prepared for this. I'm glad this part is done. Now I can save this piece for Joe. This may save him a few minutes. And then I'm going to have to make a template of where the bolt holes are. Not that we really need it, but it'd just be handy to have them that they're similar. Okay, so now we have this little relief here, just so we can get this part to come up over the bolt holes, over the 440 heads of the Allen bolts. That's the last part of that. The pin is in nice and solid. Triple CA'd in the back. This still has a little spacer in it to keep this nice and solid. Some of this will have to get cut away so that the horn can swivel back and forth. Now the next thing I have to really make a decision on is the thickness of the rudder. Now I've made planes, of course you can just use a piece of solid wood, but I like that look of, I want to make this piece look like it's solid or aluminum covered, and the back part to be the look of this real Spitfire that has the ribs. So I'm going to do this, I guess similar to the I-beamer, where we made this piece built up and this piece actually a spine piece with ribs. And that works out pretty good. It's relatively easy to do, relatively straightforward. So, but we have to work off this thickness now. This thickness is the critical part. Okay, now the critical things, again, I say this over and over again because I have massaged this curve to the point where I hope I've got it to where I'm going to be really satisfied with that. This part will get made separately and glued right in place. That's step one. But then we're going to get to this piece. Now, I need to figure out how thick I want to make this, and I can narrow this down probably another 1/16 if I want, because that's going to determine the thickness of this, and we're going to have to take it into account when we lay out the Raby rudder linkage for our rudder. So I want to figure out exactly what thickness I want to have back here, and then that's going to be the thickness that I'm ultimately going to want to put, because I want this to transition, even though this will be a rib part. I don't want this part to be, well, let me just give you an example. If this was a lot thinner, it would look like that at the back. I don't want it looking like that, and I don't want to radius this off. I want it to be as scale as possible. And if you look at all the Spitfires, they all have fabric on the rudder, so this will be one little feature that isn't going to cost us a nickel extra to do right. So what I did, I laid out 3 pieces of 1/8" tape. And you can see how much I'm going to have to sand. I'm going to sand this into that shape so that the edge of the tape, in fact I'll put a little ink line on there, but what will happen is as you wind up hitting the tape, you can feel it, and that'll give me a 3/8 piece, and I'll know my rudder post on the rudder will have to be 3/8. What happened? You fell? Hang on, Karen just fell down.
I fell on the ice.
Karen's drunk, making cookies. Look
I
at this.
saved the plate though.
But the main thing is you didn't drop the plate of cookies, right?
I dropped the cookies. I didn't drop the plate.
Here she is making our old neighbor's cookies, and she falls. I gotta go with her. I'll be back. You cannot imagine. Poor Karen. She fell on the ice. She's soaking wet. We're out delivering cookies to our neighbors. None of the neighbors are home. We gotta walk all the way back up through the ice. Oh. Anyway, when you want to be the hero of the neighborhood making cookies, you got to pay to get delivery service going. Anyway, I want to get this 3/8 of an inch. So as I get right up to the tape, just touch the tape, put the radius back at the top and bottom. Now this is the critical step that, well, I guess that we're going to have to deal with right now. I want to make sure I have a couple of things. The back of this will be parallel, and that looks good. Now it looks like up here I need to add, see, this is going to slip down into a notch. If you just glue this right on top, it's going to be brittle. The fillet will probably crack. I always prefer, and I'm assuming, yeah, I'm about an eighth inch thick here, so I can make this piece, when I actually make the parts, let this piece come down an extra 1/8 of an inch. And what that'll do, what that'll allow me to do is just drop that piece into a notch when it's done. It'll make it nice and solid, and I can glue it from the inside and from the outside, because there's going to have to be some kind of little filleting going on up there. But I know the back end of it here, I know this edge has to be 3/8. This is plus 1/8 when I lay this out. And up in the front here, this can be thin. So I can just look at this and I can lay this out. The first thing I need to do is get a sheet, I guess 1/16, glue up the skins, and I want the grain going in this direction. So I'll need to glue 2 sheets together, add this amount down here, and I'll have one side of this done. Now I made some skins up at a 1/16 C grain, made them of course a little bit oversized in every dimension, so I can get an exact fit here, including the 1/8 inch down here. Now I put a nice seam on one side and double glued the other side so that both of the skins will hopefully have a nice joint, and whichever side looks the best, put on the outside. Okay, now the next step on this is I need to make up a leading edge piece going back maybe, I'll go even a little further than I have to, because I want to really put a taper in this. I want to make a leading edge piece with the grain going exactly parallel to the leading edge. And the key thing is I want the grain in this dimension, basically because in here where this is going to get tapered, I don't want to see the grain going this way. I want to see it going this way, and it's going to add some strength. Now the next thing is going to be to glue this in position. Get it lined up, because this will hopefully give me this nice curve here. And if the grain is going in different directions here, you don't get this nice smooth curve once I take away some of that sheeting. The next piece is going to be a piece of roughly 1/4 inch square, grain going in this dimension. As we build this with the grain going around the perimeters, this is going to get very rigid, nice and straight, easy to keep straight, and it's C-grain 16th. And it'll be hollow and, I hope, extremely light. Now the next piece I want to put in here is a piece of 1/8 inch, just to make this stiff and give me a little room in case I need to adjust this angle. I'd rather have a piece of 1/8 inch in there. And then I want to lay out some 16th ribs. They'll just be actually 16th cap strips. Now the next thing is to lay out the ribs, and I want to lay them out 90 degrees. This angle has to be 90. I'll need 4 or 5 ribs on there. Now I just strip this off just like you would strip off a cap strip. And one by one we can just set these right in place. Alright, it's going to need just a little sanding and trimming. Always better to have them a little oversized anyway. Always better to leave the dust on if you're going to use thin CA. A little bit more. Now the next step, before I put the other skin on, just make sure I leave a little dust on here. There's also one other little thing never to forget to do, and that's put a pinhole in each one of these ribs so that they can, as you get into high pressure or when it gets out in the sun, well, I don't want the skins bubbling out. And you need to, or I found that the only way I can get around that is one pinhole in every rib so that it can breathe in and out just like a cockpit. Even an extra hole or two isn't going to hurt anything. And I got to make sure I don't fill these holes up with glue. Especially if you're doing a, well, I don't know what you would call it, a silk span surface, because this becomes a sealed area, and when pressure increases, it totally looks, to me it looks terrible anyway. Looks like a blowfish. Found that out with the I-beam plane, with the I-beam flaps. On a hot day they'd go cold day. Now we have to glue the other skin on. I've got this area opened up here. I made sure I have a dot, a little hole in every rib. Now the hard part is getting the taper so it looks right. And that's a little time consuming. So first I want to get all the edges at 90 degrees. Make sure I'm exactly on my yellow pattern. I haven't gotten this either bigger or smaller. Run a center line down everything, which that'll be relatively easy. And then it's this taper up here that's difficult, and as this tapers here, this is going to have maybe up to here be flat and just very slightly taper right in so that the top, and then that piece will have to mirror image into the top part of the rudder itself. Okay, so I've got a pretty good rendition of the shape that we originally started with. I need to get a center line on this. I need to check this because to be prototypical, see, this is not a 90-degree corner, but this one is. To be prototypical Spitfire, and that is fine. Now I want to get a a center line to work in as I carve this up. Be nice if we had pens that had ink in them. And this top surface is the one. This is going to remain flat, but the top piece is going to taper, the part that's on the rudder, which will be a solid piece of wood. Actually, the way I'm thinking about making a rudder is the same way I made the flaps for Relentless with a spine. Well, I guess we did it on the Spitfire too. Always works well. Easy to do, and you wind up with a piece. In this case, this rudder is super light. That's one benefit of it. All right, and this is ready to start carving this. And I got to develop this shape. This is not going to be like just take the knife and knock it out. I want to develop this shape one side at a time. I'll work on one side, get it to where I'm happy with it, and then try to mirror image it into the other side. Always referencing off the top here to see just about what that final shape is going to look like. Now I'm just trying to rough this out with a number 11 blade just to develop one side of the curve. But needless to say, the thing I can't do is make a complete airfoil here, and that wouldn't be prototypical anyway. In fact, that Spitfire that was in Houston, when we looked at the rudder of that, this part of it was pretty flat. That was one of the things I looked at. It was funny that the gentleman that owned it, he was giving us the rivet count, and the bottom of the plane had screws, the tops had rivets. He knew every detail of that restoration. Still an amazing thing on that trip to Texas. That was, and have to again thank Bill Rutherford for setting that up. That was some special treat. And now to know that that plane has been sold, and probably we'll never get to see it again unless we go to Oshkosh or something. You know, I'm trying to be conservative here, because I'd like to see one side of this developed first. Now as that shape starts to come in, one of the things that's real handy, the Bernie Trent sandpaper is just about the right radius to get in there. But again, I want to see one side of the curve and make sure I don't want to get it too far back to where this sheeting becomes a 64th of an inch or something. And as long as I can still see the center line, I know I haven't gone too far. Now that joint, we're going to bury that in thin CA eventually. So I'm not real concerned about the joint. This is handy, by the way. That's unbelievable. Just worked out that way. That's coming up pretty nice. Now we're just going to try to go over, carve the other side, and mirror image so they're both the same. Now I've got one side just about finished, just about to where I'm happy with the curve. And now to just try to mirror image it, I guess, is the only thing left here. And down here it's relatively end grain, so I know I need to just be patient. Get that roll of sandpaper. Just seems to be perfect for this job. It's almost like I planned it that way. And once I'm getting it close, then the rest I do with the sandpaper. Now right up here is where it gets to be a problem, because you got different grains. The first thing I want to do is seal it up with thin CA. It's just a lot easier to get the final shape in when the wood has got, it'll hold an edge this way. Otherwise it just keeps, the end grain keeps coming through. but it's starting to shape. It's starting to show the shape that we want on both sides. And this is so handy. This is really bringing that curve right in without a lot of tomfoolery. Now, 2 or 3 coats of thick CA on here when I have it done on this edge, because with the guys that I fly with, some of them launch the plane like that, or they have their elbow or their watch in there. And with a 90 pulling, you know, I don't want them letting it go either. So always harden up, I always do anyway, the leading edge of the stab because of the stooge, and the leading edge of the rudder for heavy-handed launchers, let's put it that way. Or if you get to a contest where you're flying and you don't have your favorite launch guy just hanging out there, well, you don't have anxiety that some guy's going to just put a dent in that. Yeah, that's coming out real nice so far. Now, there's some parts of this, and it's right up here, that it's a lot easier to get all the final shapes on. Once this is glued in place, it's going to be difficult to get those shapes. And I think I'm close enough now that what I want to do is put a couple of layers of thick CA on. The thick CA doesn't penetrate as well, but it levels out. It gives you a little bit of time to get the surfaces and the curves just right. And it gets real thin up here, so I want to make sure I'm not making it too delicate here before this is installed. Now once that kicks off, that'll be ready for another sanding, and 2 or 3 coats later, this will be ready to install in that little part that goes on the back of the fuselage. You can see what we've got as a final shape. Symmetrical. After 3 coats of thick CA, that gave me the shape, the taper. Now what I'm going to have to do, and I'll do it on the next session, I'm going to have to make a pattern for this, then put a slot in the top piece. And the reason I'm quitting a little early here is because I think Karen really hurt herself when she fell on the ice. And can you imagine this now? Here we are. She's baking cookies for everybody in the neighborhood, baking cookies for all our relatives and friends and whatever, making plates for people. She goes to deliver them and falls on the ice. That's horrible. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow to work on this. We have, I'll be thinking about how I want to do this, but the thing I wanted to emphasize is this is so important to get right and get it hardened with thick CA before that gets set into the final position. And we'll think about what else we want to do to that overnight and get back to this tomorrow. I got up really early this morning because I wanted to work on that rudder. There's an awful lot of other stuff to do around the shop. And the birds are the only one keeping me company. Karen's not even awake yet. And the reason I wanted to get a real early start this morning, there's some really critical detailing I have to do. First thing, I have to make a template for this opening. And it's not the opening at the bottom, it's the opening 1/8 of an inch up, and then find that shape and cut that shape out of here as neatly as possible. So I didn't want to start this job right at the end of the day and then kind of feel under pressure to rush. So this way Karen gets a couple extra hours of sleep, and I want to get this started today. Because what's going to happen with the holiday season coming up, we just have company and obligations and dogs to feed and ice to chop, and this gets crazy, and I don't want to let this get to the point where I'm not totally passionate about it. And believe me, when you start this early in the morning, nothing is better. The old Javalia. Now here's the problem in a nutshell, is we don't have, in other words, as this part goes down inside the fuselage, the leading edge changes. So we want to catch it right at the very end if possible, and that's about 1/8 of an inch down. So what I thought I'd do is this is just a piece of scrap wood, and I'd kind of just, well, let's reverse it. That would make more sense. And I can see up here the taper is very severe. But it's easier to cut up a piece of scrap a few times than it is to, what I'm afraid of is just to put too big of a gouge in there and then have to fill it in Now I'm trying to look down and see what this shape starts to look like. So what I'm going to do is just see how close that shape is. Then if we are close, and of course the front will have to have a taper, if we are close, I'll try to transpose this in and leave the line on, and then just gently sand it until that part just fits right in the way we want. Now of course, by leaving the line on, I know it's going to be undersized. And I really don't know what this shape is going to look like until I, well, may have to make several patterns, but to get this shape really close, let's get the part. And we want this to sink down in, this just happens to be 1/8 of an inch. Now see, the problem is, and it's already a problem, it's way too wide in the front. Now I'm glad I didn't do that, and the simple reason is, let me show this up close. What would happen? That would all have to be filled with glue. So by keeping this 1/8 of an inch, I can see that the top part, what's going to have to happen is these angles in the front are going to have an angle on them to get a decent fit. So let me go step 2 here. Let's see if we can make one right here. And it seems like a small thing, but it's really not a small thing, because this part is about as far from the CG as anything else on the plane. Now, where we're missing it is up in the front. So what I'm going to do here, and sometimes this is the hardest part of any modeling, is making these templates and fits, and a lot of people are satisfied just to fill everything with DAP and aero epoxy and stuff, but we hope we don't have to. Now what I'm going to try to do here is just by eye, by looking at how much that part came in, and put a little bit of a taper on it. Let's see if this works. See, until you do this 100 times, you don't really know. Now I'm also going to hold a knife on an angle outward for that first little bit. Now I could bring the knife up to 90 degrees. Now, knife on a 45-degree angle. It's similar to cutting crown molding, if you've ever cut your own crown molding. You know, it's just crazy how hard it is to get the fits just right. But boy, once you get them, this one didn't cut all the way through. And I would rather cut this on the small side. Boy, this is some scrap wood. Some of our famous 25-pound wood here. And let's see if this one fits any tighter up in the front. Oh yeah. Now just the back doesn't fit right because I didn't catch the line just right, but look at the difference in the nice fit up there. So now I know I'm real close with this. This is real close to being what I want, except what I'm going to really want on here is up in the front. When I actually do cut this, I want to have this become part of an angle. And the reason for that is, if you've ever cut 2 pieces of molding, you know what happens is you want to relieve the cut so they just touch on the very front. You want to get rid of all the material in the back. It's easier to make a nice joint there. Let's just see. I know we're taking a lot of time just to explain this, because this is one thing. And what I've seen a lot of guys do, just take a rudder, glue it on top of the top block, and you turn the plane over to work on it, and you hear. That's one of those. Sometimes you just have to pay the price right now. And then we had to be thicker in the back here. Let's just see if that fits right in there. Now you really can't tell for one reason. Where's my sanding block? And I want to show this, because I got to get rid of the original line. It's deceiving to see that line there. But here's what's happening with that relieved cut. If I push this up in there and show you up close how nice that cut is. Now you see the difference? You'd almost not even need any extra glue to get that. So now we have a good pattern. Now we know, and I'll leave the incline on, get the length just right, back cut it, and see with the back cut in there, when this slides in, I'm getting even a better glue joint. It'll be a lot better. So anyway, that's the trick of the morning, and if we can get this set in place, having that template is going to be a big help. Okay, so the next step is to get an accurate center line on the whole thing so we can start working off that center line when we lay out this shape that we've just created. Now I know up here I want to cut this. I've got that traced pretty accurately on the underside and on a 45-degree angle about to there. And it's this angle it's the angle that's going to be similar to cutting crown molding and only leaving the edges. Probably every carpenter 100 years ago knew how to do that. You know how many carpenters know how to do it now? Very few. Lost skills. And we're going to go down into this about 1/8 of an inch to start with. And I'd always suggest cutting it on the underside. And on any model, even a model like this, if you add up 100 little places where you don't have to fill it with Bondo or glue or filler, every time you add one of those up, and then when it's back here, you basically triple it, for the simple reason that whatever weight you put back here, you're going to have to put 2.5 times that amount up in the nose. Okay, right back here it's still grabbing. But I thought this is one of those critical things that everybody should, assuming that everybody wants to have high-end, real nice fit modeling. Now the two things, when this is set in position, we got a really nice fit here, by the way. Maybe it was our lucky day or something. I need this to be perfectly straight in this dimension before I hit it with glue. And I want it straight this way. I don't want to have it canted off one way or the other. And it looks like we're pretty close. If anything, it's got to go that way just a hair. But the best way to do this is 1 drop of CA, tack it in position, and then if you have to, in fact, here I just went too far. 1 drop of CA at a time. And we would have to have this whole piece permanent before we can make up the rudder, because we're going to have to connect the bottom edge, the top edge. This is all going to have to fit relatively nicely. It feels like I got it real close, and what I'm just going to do is just 1 drop here. I don't want to try to do a permanent joint until I know this is going to be completely straight on that trailing edge, and every time I hit it, just double check I haven't got that out of alignment. Okay, now I'll get a little bit up here. Okay, that looks pretty good. And you can see now we'll be able to glue it from the inside. It'll be really nice. Now this is relatively easy. In fact, I'm going to do it this way so it drips down toward the tail post. I can glue this from the inside. Just let the glue run all the way to the end. Once again, and I know this sounds like overkill, but it's not, believe me. I want that joint absolutely solid before I start doing the final sanding on it. And that little extra time we took to make that part, a little Q-tip in here, let it run up in here, reinforce the pin, Now another thing that the old Bernie Trent sandpaper comes in handy for is right in here. I want this to blend so right at the end it disappears. And I purposely left it sticking up a couple of thousandths extra so I could get just come right in off of the fuse top and redo that radius. So this is permanently installed now. We've got our straight center line. This area here I'll just dress off the glue joint. Boy, that went together. This went together as nice as any of the ones I've done so far. Now one of the things I'm real fussy about is where this comes through here. I don't want to feel, when I close my eyes, I don't want to feel where that part enters. And I found if I can just get that with the big sanding roll of sandpaper and make a couple of these different diameters, I can just gradually get it to come right in and then harden it with the CA. Once it's hard, then you don't have a problem, because I know somebody launching a plane is going to catch a Rolex watch there, and there's not much you can do about it except bulletproof the plane. Now when I run my hand there, oh, that feels just about as good as it gets right there. Now once I got that totally sanded in, again, this little spot right here, I have noticed on many really nice models, it jumped right out at me that this was one of the things that I'd be happy with anyway, in my own fussy little way. And I remember a good example is the Tiger Cat. Making this transition, when you have a curved transition into a flat, now even if you go back to the old I-beamer, the having this, boy, that was a lot of work. And it's rock hard. It's rock hard, almost like it's plywood. It's plenty of CA in there. Another difficult one, this one here, where it just comes right in, and I didn't want it to cross that joint at all. Now I totally sanded this groove, and let me just show one of the things that I think helps if you have a T-bar. Because I want to get that edge. Every time I put some material in that fillet, I want it to be rough. I want sanding scratches on it. I don't want to have it sanded smooth with 600 paper or something. You don't get any grip to the CA now, because this is going to be a very small, tiny fillet. Now if I do that operation 4, 5, 6 times, no kicker, what I'll in essence have is just the tiniest CA glue fillet in there. This side's already dry. And I can just dress it off. But each one of these joints, each one of these coats of CA, I want to have some scratches in the CA underneath it. Boy, it's wonderful getting started early in the morning like this. You know, in an hour or two, when the phone isn't ringing and people aren't coming over and dogs aren't barking and cookies aren't cooking, get so much more done than in the middle of the afternoon. It seems like everything goes into slow motion. But I really wanted to get this step moving on. I wanted to make the rudder today, but I don't know how the day is going to play out. Now the next area I want to harden up is this edge, because this edge, of course, as this rudder moves back and forth, you're going to see this edge. Just in case somebody catches a Rolex watch up there or something. In fact, we used to call him Rolex Rich. Not that we're accusing you of doing anything, Rich, but now that should harden that up. I don't want to harden this up yet because I want to get the hinge pockets in. But it looks like the next step on this is I'm going to have to frame up the rudder. And this, of all of the ones like this I've done, this is the lightest by far. But again, it's a small piece. I don't have the rudder on yet. But this whole method of construction, you can use this. I think you can use it on any plane that you're making a take-apart plane on, whether you make it a Thunderbolt or an Impact. Well, it's Cosmonato plane. I don't know who gets the credit for coming up with most of this. Maybe it's Cosmonato, maybe it's not, maybe it's one of the other Europeans. So I'm not even gonna attempt it, but it worked well. I want to thank Kazi again for sharing it, and certainly his workmanship and craftsmanship is right up there with the best. And he's seen enough windy videos that I'm sure he's gotten a few good tips off my videos too. So Karen goes out while I'm working here, gets the mail, brings the mail in, and look at what we have to look at. Hey, Rich Walbridge's twins. Unbelievable. And Rich, if you only knew how jealous Karen and I are. We are grandchildless here. Grandchildless in Seattle. Anyway, thanks so much for sharing these pictures of the twins with us. This is like a Christmas card or something, isn't it? Yeah, like a baby card. But Rich, hey, I think you're a lucky guy. Now what you really should do, Rich, you should treat them, you know, like babies when they grow up, they want to go places and see Disneyland and stuff. You should bring them to Brodax. That would really inspire them to become modelers. Anyway, we really do. Karen and I both enjoy this. We almost feel like we're their godparents, pseudo godparents. Anyway, for people that may not go back all the way into the end of history here with our planes, this was our 86 plane. And I had made these flaps with what I call a spine method. It's similar to a Juno, the way Billy Werwidge builds, or built some of his planes. And I've seen other planes that are like this. Some of the European planes have the same look, but building off a spine, when you're making a spine rudder, like we've used on several planes, it gives you a lot of choices. Now, one of the choices is because the spine is always your center line, so it's almost impossible to get something crooked. All right, so it's time for breakfast here, but here's what I wanted to show. This is the initial piece we need to find, a piece of 16th, maybe sea grain if we can, with the grain going in this direction. And what that will wind up being is our center line for hinge pockets, and our center line when we do the carving, we'll have a block at the top and bottom, and I'll try to get a very close to scale amount of ribs in there. Now doing this, it's a little bit labor intensive, but you know, nothing on this plane is like the expedient way. There are no foam wings or no pre-made parts or anything. This is the one that you gotta have a passion and you gotta want to get up early in the morning. This is not going to happen for you. Now I got a piece of sea grain that's relatively nice and straight, and the first thing I want to do, I want to trace this in its actual state. And I'm going to cut it about a 1/16 of an inch oversize. I'll explain why in a minute, because as we start to stack parts and make edges and things, I want to be able to bring it right back into this with sandpaper if it's got a little bit of a off curve or whatever, and I need to make this little piece and just attach it up there. Step one, and if you don't have sea grain, this is really not critical, but as this part starts to come to life, the sea grain isn't hurting you, that's for sure. Now I just wanted to show why I left about a 1/16 of an inch of a perimeter on the spine, so in the final product I can just get that last little bit sanded right in. Now the next step on this is I need to find an appropriate, and I'm guessing what thickness it's going to have to be, probably 2 pieces a 1/4 inch. 2 little blocks for the front, 2 for the bottom, and I need to lay out the rib spacing. Okay, so I got the ribs laid out. I marked this so that Joe would have a reference where the ribs were and all the sizes and shapes. We're basically done with this temporarily. Next thing on this, of course, is to get the blocks, get them roughed in, tacked in place, and then that sets us up for where we're going to get the two edges of this. Now I'll use thick CA, and what's going to happen when I join this, I'm going to have cross-grain wood. So this is going to get really rigid. And I'll have a permanent center line around the whole perimeter of the part, so hopefully it won't in any way be warped or twisted. Now when I'm gluing these on, I want them to be even on both sides, because I don't want to see one rib up, one rib down. From the back, I want to see that the look of the fabric and all the ribs line up on both sides. Now to build up the hinge line and still have enough room to put my little hinge angle in, I need a piece that's a 1/16 and a piece that's an 1/8 to bring it out to this thickness right here. It's just easier to laminate two pieces than it is if I put a full 1/4 inch piece in there. I'm just going to have to cut it down. It's just easier to get rid of some of it by laminating that part. Now I got the two pieces of 1/16 on there. They're basically cap strips. I'm going to put the two pieces of 1/8, and that should give me the exact hinge line that I'm looking for. Alright, I got all laminated parts on the leading edge. Now I want to make out of the same 1/8 inch material, because back here this is only going to be 1/8 of an inch on each side, and I'll just start with having two strips of 1/8 inch. Trace this out on the same piece that I made these out of. A lot of this material is going to get removed, and at this point in time the part is relatively heavy because we haven't removed a lot of the material. But this, laying it out with a spine, I think this is a nice way to build it. And I've made flaps, elevators. I actually made a stab for Relentless. Same way with a spine. And you never lose that center line. Now to figure that out, and it's not real critical, I can just use the part itself, lay it out, maybe a 1/4 of an inch or so, roughly the same thickness as up at the front. Now once I made that part, I cut it right in half, so the back part is a little over 1/8 of an inch, so we have some material to work with. And I need to get it right in position. Make sure I'm lined up with the actual edge, not that piece that's on overage. Okay, so the trailing edge is in. This is all going to get thinned out in the final carving, but everything at this point has to be oversized. Now the next part is I'm going to strip off with the stripper just ribs that basically just a little bit oversized, so I'll be able to hand sand that curve in. And if I make them, let's see, I may as well just make them the thickness of this, and I can put that curve in. And once I set the stripper, it'll go right down. Now I'm making these an 1/8 inch higher so that these are more equally spaced, otherwise I had too much of a gap at the top. And you can see how everything is totally oversized for right now. It'll be a whole nother session to carve and sand and hollow and all of that stuff. But this is going to make a very scale-like part, I think. Now with the ribs on one side, what I want to do is I want to carefully line up the ribs looking from the back forward to make sure when these come to the end that I don't have them twisted in some way. Now the next thing I have to figure out, our Raby rudder linkage is basically going to be right here. And we can't have it go up. It's awkward looking if it goes up, and I think it throws out the geometry some. And it's going to be pretty much that we're going to want to have the horn right here. So what I'm going to do is make a little box right here, so that when I make the plywood part, this is going to get shaped first, and then we'll have a little pocket to put that. And I usually make it out of laminates or 60-foot plywood. Okay, that little box is for the control horn when we do the final shaping. Now the next thing, I want to take all this extra material along the edge off, just to square all the edges up, because you can see from this I left it plenty oversized even on the bottom. I want to bring that outline in, and it's still square, but I want to get the outline right where I want it. Now getting these edges nice and flat just takes a lot of little patience. Basically because the part at this point in time is still pretty flimsy. Until it's tissued, if anybody's ever built an I-beam wing, you know when it's just ribs, it's a bag of air. You need to get the tissue on, and so all the while we're doing any shaping or whatever, shaping and fitting, and just going right back to see if it's close. I still got some to take off the bottom. But no matter how long this takes, I think it's worth it because this adds a little scale detail to the plane that we have to put a rudder on it anyway. And of course you could just make a piece of 1/4-inch sheet, but I think in this case it's more scale, it's more realistic, it's lighter, and it just adds one more little focal point to the plane. Now we're at the end of this DVD and I wanted to get to a certain point, which it looks like I've gotten to. I've got all the edges squared off. The ribs are all in good alignment, and that is a critical thing. Now what's going to happen next time we get to do a work session, and I assume that'll be either tonight or tomorrow morning, we'll be ready to put all the airfoil shapes, all the curves. It'll probably be a whole session of just matching things, and we'll save that for the next time we get to work on this. Oh, the last couple of days we made I think some real progress in this. And when we look at our original vision and how it's evolving and where it stands right now, I'm thinking we're really going to be, well, more scale than ever. I think this is going to be one of the more exciting planes when we get to fly it, and having Rich Jacobone Stuka around, probably going to make it even more exciting for Joe and I both when we get to fly him. Anyway, we'll see you on the next tape. Share the tapes with everybody.
You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply as time goes by. And when two lovers woo, they still say I love you. On that you can rely. No matter what the future brings.